From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your Professional Misfits. Hello friends, all the way from Sydney, Australia, I'm your host, Christopher Sellers.
And from Portland, Oregon, I'm Brody Ipox.
We are your Professional Misfits, and for the first time ever, we brought a misfit friend. Say hi, Tony.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good to see you, man. Good to see you. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's season 1. We're talking about professional development. It's episode 4. We're discussing can you change careers and basically what happens when you do. And I've brought Tony Albrecht in, who's a bit of a friend of mine from LinkedIn and from up in Canada, up in Toronto at the moment. So I'm in Sydney, Brody's in Portland, Tony's in Toronto. So we're officially international. And for the folks at home who might not know you, Tony, can you give us a quick introduction about you, what you do, and how you spend your time on LinkedIn?
Sure. So these days I describe myself primarily as an entrepreneur and evangelist for the transformational power of creativity, which is how you and I came to be linky friends, Chris. And I describe how my life's trajectory has unfolded as a response to recovery from two different things. Number one being alcoholism, and number two being lawyering, where I'm approaching 13 years since my last drink, and I have now torched my legal career twice, most recently in October 2021. I think it's going to stick this time, though when I say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm currently building a company called Contender Creative, and it's looking like a digital marketing agency at the moment, focused on helping law firms leverage LinkedIn. So I have not actually made it all that far from the legal field, though I'm having a lot more fun. And I live, as you mentioned, up in Canada. We're actually a little bit north of Toronto, up in the woods, where I live with my wife and our 2 little ones.
Beautiful. So most definitely fit the criteria of a professional misfit. And congratulations on 13 years sober, buddy. That's a big deal. And congratulations on recovering from being a solicitor. That's that's worthwhile as well. So we'll jump straight into it, gents. There's a reason I brought the 3 of us together, and we're talking about can you change careers? And obviously the 3 of us have fairly checkered backgrounds. And in the modern time of disruptions and COVID and mass resignations and rehirings and then firings, a lot of disruption, a lot of uncertainty in terms of, let's say, the traditional career pathway, and a lot of change whether we like it or not. And so in penciling out this episode subject, I realized there's sort of 2 circumstances where you change careers, and one is when you have the option to change, and Tony, we'll get to your story a bit later. But the first, of course, is when you don't have the option to change. So my first question, and Brody, I'll push you onto this bus, is, have you ever been fired? And if so, when and how and what were the circumstances?
Come on, why you got to do that to me?
I know we all have, but I'll start with you first.
Yeah, so I mean it's happened more than once if we're going to the full level of honesty, and it really each time it's kind of been, whether that was retail or even sales, I became disillusioned, and the attitude didn't reflect the company. The company values, absolutely. And that's a hard one because that's on me, right? That's not anybody else's fault. That's not the company. That's not that's me. But it has happened more than once, and I've been let go, and I've been flat out asked not to come back. So
right. I definitely have. I mean, you spend any time in hospo, and it can be just like, yeah, great, don't come back tomorrow. Over something as simple as a personality difference. I remember I was changing tips once. This was back when you had a tip jar, and I was changing the coins and whatever else in the till to just make everything, because we needed to change. and the cafe owner saw this from the kitchen and then grabbed my hand because he thought I was stealing, and then said, "Don't come back tomorrow," sort of thing. So there's been that. Let's see, contracts. Yeah, I mean, not so much fired, but I guess I have had people lie about me to whoever it was in charge, and then it comes back through the grapevine where you're asked not to come back, sort of thing. And that was a rude shock. And again, you have no recourse, because at the time I think I was a contractor, so you have no employee rights, you have no say. You had, who said this about me? Well, we can't say. So like an anonymous complaint about something that is absolutely untrue, but now I'm out of a contract and a job with no recourse. So that's always fun. Tony, got any similar sort of experiences?
The only time I've ever actually been let go, I think, was my job at the library my freshman year of college. And I don't think it counts because I got fired on like my last day because I didn't go. And so they called me, and I was like, it's what they basically said, this is the third time you've not shown up this year, so we have to fire you. I said, well, I mean, I'm done working there, so we have to fire you. Like, okay.
Wow.
I don't know. I don't think it counts either. I don't think it counts.
Weird. I mean, yeah, it's yeah, so you got off lightly. I guess it can be tough, right? I mean, if this is your bread and butter, and you both have kids, for instance, like I'm probably irresponsible is not the right word, but I don't have the same sort of commitments to a partner or kids or those sort of responsibilities where a mortgage or bread and butter and shoes are at stake, So how do we deal with the shock of this sort of change? Because it's not financial is one side of it, but also we sort of define ourselves by our career. Tony, for a long time you were a solicitor, and that was the job, and that's who you were. So if that sort of sense of identity or purpose gets taken away from you, how would we manage that? Or for the folks at home, like, what's some sort of objective consideration around something like that?
Are you aiming that at me?
Yeah, why not?
Well, so yeah, I mentioned torching my career twice, but that both times it's been voluntary, right? Where I ultimately, I don't think I made the right choice in becoming a lawyer in the first place. So a lot of the last 12 years has been my kind of, in certain respects, sort of trying to unwind that original sin of
that
becoming
rehab.
a lawyer. And yeah. But I did have the experience of, I mean, frankly, on two different occasions. The first time I stepped away was to kind of do the whole sell all your stuff and go traveling thing. I did that in 2013, and what I thought would turn into 1 year of traveling ended up being more like 4. And then again, leaving the law in 2021, there is that real challenge of what do you do when your identity is tied up in what you do for a living, where in that 4 years traveling, I mean, I spent a lot of time in a lot of different settings. I was still doing a little bit of contract work as an attorney, so I guess it was still like a form, my livelihood. And I did keep that identity fairly close in hand. And then when I left in 2021, it actually was challenging to leave that behind, because even though I hadn't necessarily, I didn't see it as a good fit for me professionally and my personality, and my skill set to a certain degree, but the once I stopped being that and stopped calling myself that, it definitely left a hole in a way
Yeah.
that I don't actually know that I handled it all that gracefully.
Yeah.
But it's like our conversation around can you or how do you change careers, or um, like all that has been really poignant in that moment of like late 2021, making that transition into just like a new role in a totally new industry. Um, but yeah, all that to say, I don't know how I figured. I don't know that I did it all that gracefully, frankly.
Brody?
Yeah, I mean that's a loaded question, right? I think anybody, like Tony kind of touched on, that's self-aware, kind of realizes that in whatever kind of transition you're in, there's some lows for all of us. You know what I mean? And yeah, that's a hard one. Tying identity in, and that kind of thing, where it's the gravity of it is so much heavier, is you just got to make it through it. You know what I mean? I'm not sure there's necessarily a definitive answer. I think for each person it's kind of different, whether you're transitioning into a new role, whether, the current role you're in has been taken from you and you kind of have to reassess. Is it going to be a transition? Am I looking for a new one? But, it's weird how it's subjective. You know what I mean? I think each person needs their own skill set to kind of navigate whatever they're going through.
It's yeah, I agree. It's that shock. It's that shock, right? And then it's that existential question of, so what now? And it's interesting, Tony, to hear you talk about it first, because by your own admission, you haven't really been fired and you chose to do it. But even still, choosing to step out, you still have this moment of, so what now? And I don't know if I handled it so great. So for context, I mean, I posted this yesterday. It was a quick top 10 of different sort of careers that I've had, and there's actually a top 20 list. So I'll quickly run through it to give you some context. So here's a quick top 20 of all the careers or professions or whatever that I've sort of been involved in or taken on a professional level. Actor, barista, playwright, screenwriter, teacher, kung fu instructor, online community manager, hospitality trainer, unemployed idealist, that's always a big one, director, producer, bartender, L&D designer, founder, board advisor, creative director, coach, author. I was a private investigator for a week. Some of you might know that story. Now landed somewhere between entrepreneur and thought leader, even though I hate both those titles, and occasional street photographer and sleight of hand con artist. So arguably these are hobbies. Some of them, some were by choice, that, and some were by not by choice or by design. There's probably a billion stories about how I fell into each one of those and then fell out of them or chose them, and even now making it up as I go along. I still don't know. The whole point of the post yesterday was, I still don't know quite what's going on. But here's some opportunities that seem to have caught fire. So let's pursue these opportunities. And I can tell you that on the one hand, rejection or being fired or whatever else, it doesn't get any easier. Like, even for an actor, they say, like, oh, you've got thick skin, you get used to rejection. I'm like, it's not quite accurate. Like, rejection still hurts. I guess actors and musicians and such learn to professionally manage it, because you need to get on with life. So there's a little bit more skill and time in there. And, besides, you'll sulk for a bit, and lay people and some artists, like, I want to sulk and feel bad, so you make me feel better about whatever this is. And sometimes you just don't have that option. You're going to have to pick yourself up and get on with it at some point. So if I can do it once or twice or 20 times, then there's hope for all of you out there for once or twice or however many times you choose to. So this moves on to sort of the second half of this conversation, which is a bit more interesting of like, can you choose to change careers? And Tony, we'll come to you with this because you've got a really interesting story of how and why you chose to step out of law. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. And I think the direct answer to that question is not only can we change careers, but I think at this point it's inevitable for almost
Yeah,
all of us.
that's a good
It
point.
is just the world that our grandparents occupied, the one where you stay in the same job for 40 years,
9 to 5.
doesn't
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. It no longer exists. And the internet turned everything upside down, and the rate of change is accelerating, right? And we're talking about this in April 2021, where I feel like the AI talk it might have gotten a little quieter online over the last like 2 weeks, but
Yeah.
that's only a momentary lull. I mean, that's going to upend everything again, um, in a way that I, the I think about with my kids and our education and how we're approaching that. That's like, fuck if I know what jobs are even going to be in existence in
Right.
20 years.
Yeah.
That it's like the rate of change is just so fast that who knows? Which, I mean, to where your question was going, Chris, about how I moved out of the law. I mean, initially, I basically, being an American, I had plenty of student loans. It took me a long time to pay them off. We moved to Canada about this, and like at the same time, I was making my last loan payment. Right as I was set to make partner that summer for the law firm I was working at, but ultimately decided I didn't want to go that route, and the move to Canada sort of took partner off the table, put me on a dead end at the firm I was at, which then made it easier to start figuring out what next. Right, to your point earlier, I ended up taking a sales role with a friend's company, and that's when I started paying attention to LinkedIn, which is, I've never really been a social media guy, and only started paying attention because of that role that I needed to get in front of people. I started talking about creativity. I've made a bunch of friends, present company included, and gained some traction with content. Learned that I had some affinity for it, that I had some skill in it, and I've had a blast with it, frankly. So, when I say that I've started a digital marketing agency, like 18 months ago, it wouldn't have occurred to me that this was a way people could make money. And it's all unfolded very quickly with my embracing really like content and personal branding, which would be like two things that earlier versions of myself would not have seen as my future in any way.
So what, I guess something I want to drill down on a little bit is what was, like, we won't ever leave a career or a role if we're happy and satisfied. So obviously there has to be some level of dissatisfaction or discontentment for you to choose differently, like not law. Because for most, like if you're listening and you're in your teens or even 20s, law seems like a lock. Like you will never be out of work. It's a profession that's respected. You'll always make good money. So what the fuck are you doing, and why would you ever choose to leave something like that?
My sister and I started a blog in 2015 called Off Scripting, And the basic premise of that blog was if you are living a story that feels like it was written for somebody else, then you're probably going to be better off pausing, just like stopping the progress down that path, stepping off of that path that you're on, and seeing what happens if you create some space for something else to happen. And like I've spent a lot of time and energy wrestling with those questions, Chris, right? Because there is a lot of guilt, feelings of guilt and shame around.
Even now, still?
No, now I don't care. No, I've had a lot of years and a lot of reps on.
Yeah. Of getting over it. Yeah.
I've processed those things, but early on, I mean,
Of course, yeah.
I was very fortunate. Like I like check all the privilege boxes pretty much, right? And so there was a sense of letting people down. There was a sense of like wasting the opportunities that had been given to me. And a lot of them had been just handed to me, right? Like without me really doing anything to earn the opportunities. So there was most definitely a feeling, a conflict there, a tension around like who are you to
Do you
step
have
off of
the
that?
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and what I've come to is I mean, frankly, I think of it as like I opened up a job for somebody who hopefully wants it more than I did. Like I opened up space for somebody else in that industry, and I went off in another direction that I think, like I now the way I see it now, I should have been starting companies from the time I was 19 years old. That's just what I should have been doing. It's just entrepreneurship wasn't on my radar as a career path. Like I grew up in a house that was more like, which graduate degree are you going to get?
Yeah.
So like it never even occurred, even as I was like starting side hustles in college and law school. I did in law school too. It never occurred to me that that could be a career. But yeah, go ahead.
No, that sense of permission, Brody. I know, like you and I have talked about this a bit when it comes to either money or purpose of work or these sorts of things. Is that people often feel like they need a reason or a permission to live. For want of a better example, like if you want to have a better life, like you're allowed to have it, But then there's immediately this introspective guilt. It's like, well, am I? Like, can I reach for that thing? Like, am I? In Tony's case, like, am I allowed to leave law? Like, so, like, Brody, where are you at with it? Because you've done a ton of stuff behind the scenes as well, like from being a rodeo clown and all sorts of things. But and now you kind of stepped into similarly like your own media agency where it's your bag. So how much of this was by choice, and like every choice comes with a cost as well. Like it's not free. Yeah. So what's been the costs with the choices that you've made?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I mean, and I think it just takes, a certain level of willingness to look at it, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that process. And number one, that's why they don't go there or make the jump. And then number two, that's why when they do, it's not sustained, right? Because, there's some things that you have to identify as sacrifice, because that's 9 times out of 10 when you're chasing something worth it to you, there is that degree, and it seems like a cliche, that everybody talks about, but it's a cliche for a reason, right? So like one of the biggest things for me is like almost same thing as Tony in a different vein, to where it was like I knew I was disappointing people by not going to college, by not pursuing the degree, and fully capable, and musically talented, and could have done so much in that arena, and it wasn't for me, so I left and checked out of that really early, but at the same time, like I said, you look back and you're like, even though there are certain aspects of this that have led me to where I am now, and I'm happy to be where I am now, um, you know, would I done it a little differently next time? And there's definitely times that I check that box. So
Yeah, interesting. See, I don't know, I have one where I don't think I'm over it. And that was like, similar to you, I was at uni studying arts and education and then quit to run a Kung Fu school full time. So I'm 20, 19, 20. I've been training for a year. I was running beginners in 6 months and was running the school within 12 as a senior student, which is ridiculous. But so by 21, I was running the school. But I was also a live-in student, so which is again unheard of. So the school was on the 3rd floor. I was living on the 2nd floor with 2 other friends. And so by 21, I figured I have my passion, my pastime, my pursuit, my craft. I'm dirt poor, but I don't care. I have friends, family, I'm respected. People around town knew me. So as far as I was concerned, and I loved it. You know what I mean? It was as much as a spiritual and intellectual fulfillment as it was, running classes and all that. So it was, as far as I was concerned, at 21, I was set. And then lost it all in Shakespearean circumstances. So, and with beyond my control, had no choice, completely unjust, and you are evicted and excommunicated, and all the rest. So the prince was thrown out of the kingdom, and I'm at 21, and you have that moment of what next, and it was nothing but a black abyss, because I had lost all of my friends. My parents didn't really understand, and I probably didn't have the tools to cope, and they didn't have the tools to help me. And it was only by either desperation or luck that I found the notice in the paper for, there's auditions for acting college. And I, on a whim, thought, I liked drama in high school, I'll audition. And then it sort of took off on this side thing. But it took me the better part of a decade, if I'm honest, to sort of cope with the fact that I wasn't that kid anymore. And sort of having to rebuild some sort of sense of identity and purpose. Like if you found the thing you wanted to do for life. And if any of you at home have found it, you're golden when you do, right? And it's not some people never do.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have it ripped away from me with no say. And then you have to start again from scratch. And funnily enough, it's these sort of cycles, if I'm honest, have come around, probably once a decade or so. Like you lose everything either by design or not, and then have to start again.
In some sort of way. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Whether career is one thing, relationships, like I'm probably sure we've all had like some massive breakup that you thought never saw coming, or X, Y, and Z. Like we all sort of go through these processes. So the moral of the story, I guess, is disruption's always going to happen. And to your point, Tony, when it's happening so fast, in a professional sense, then how are you going to cope, and what do you want to do, and what sort of life do you want to actually live? Like, was that a thought for you, Tony, when you were stepping out of law? It's like, did you have an idea of the life that you wanted, or is it just I'm stepping off the cliff and I'll make it up as I fall?
The line, I'm a fan of quotes, as you know by now, Chris, and the one I use more than any other is a Vonnegut line that says we must continually be jumping off cliffs and growing wings on the way down.
Yeah.
I mean, that is pretty much my style. I will say, I mean, in 2013, it's a really good question. And there are, when I think about the making a transition with some intention, there, I've now had experience with two different ways. And ultimately, I like them both. I think one is probably better than the other slightly. But the first one was just taking a pause. So it was just like save up enough money to be able to cover your expenses over this amount of time, right? And then like just like see what happens. It would just create the vacuum and then like have the experience where, and I remember a moment in like July of 2013 where I woke up and I had nothing on my calendar literally for the rest of my life. Like there was nothing for the rest of my life. It was really wild. Um, the other approach is one where you kind of find your next landing spot, and so like that could be like finding the next role, which is like what I did in 2021, right? I didn't leave my job until I knew what was coming next, which, once you have a wife and kids, your risk tolerance changes, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it could also be like if the more entrepreneurial track, like you start something on the side and then you grow it, you grow it until a level where, right? And if I had to do it over again, I think I probably would have, I say, like incorporated more of the second thing when I did the first thing. Although I say that, and I tried a couple different businesses.
Yeah.
They just weren't very good businesses, back then.
Yeah. Yeah, we've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah.
So that's before we sort of wrap up, I guess that's worth something. That's something worth touching on, because we might leave the good job, we might step out, we might be the entrepreneur, we might start something. It might suck and fail. So how do we deal with that? Because I know all three of us have been there. Do we resent the fact that we left the stable 9 to 5, or do you sort of shrug and go, next thing? How do you keep that self-confidence, I guess? Because entrepreneurship's not for everyone, and there's a reason. And that's not to advocate it for either way, but if it's something that you're considering, if you want some autonomy and independence, I suppose, if you want some control over your professional path, what's some things you need to be aware of? Brody, I'll come to you, my man, because this is sort of your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really, how I am, and perspective's a big one for me. And like in all reality, a lot of people think that entrepreneurship is that, pure autonomy and freedom, and it's not. It's and one of the things I've had to come to grips with and kind of, in essence, sacrifice, right, is that ideal. Because
Right.
with these things that I'm building or things that I'm doing, I put in 3 to 5 times more effort than something that was a career path or an employment option. um, so it's sometimes it can be a stark reality where it's like, oh shit, this is way bigger than I thought it was. But I'm intoxicated with learning and growing. So it's a really wonderful place for me to be. And I think for a lot of people that enjoy that kind of aspect of life or growth or introspection, it's going to challenge you, and it's going to hold a mirror up to who you are and how you do things. And if you're not willing to take a look, then you're never going to find success. You know what I mean? Because the reality is, like we're talking about changing careers, sometimes even if you stay in the same career path, you got to change up tactics, right? You got to
Yeah,
change
right.
strategy. If there's goals or things that you want to achieve and you're not achieving them, it might be time to switch up how we're approaching those goals.
Yeah.
So that's what it is for me. And I think I wish more people didn't have an expectation of what it is or should be, to transition or change or go into entrepreneurship, and really just kind of center in the fact that you're going to take, either a hit on the positive or negative, and you can choose how you look at that.
Here's a question actually I've got as an Australian. Like, how does entrepreneurship sit with like your friends and family in terms of support? Because like we sort of make a joke about it on LinkedIn, like it's entrepreneur is kind of a bullshit term and everyone wants to be an entrepreneur and be the next hot thing. And if you called yourself an entrepreneur in Australia, you'd get sneered at, like you're a fucking tool, right? So you would never use that term. Say, oh look, I'm building something, I'm working on something.
I was gonna say, what's the word you use? Like,
No,
I actually,
you'd never label yourself as, I'm an entrepreneur. You go, look, you'd play it down like, I'm working on something. Like, the app, for instance, that I'm working on. I'm never gonna call myself an entrepreneur or a disruptor or anything. I'm like, no, I'm working on this side project. And so you downplay until it sort of launches and becomes something, and then you just shrug and go, oh yeah,
You've mentioned that though, where like culturally, that's kind of like where you guys like balance your attitude, is like, like dismissive almost, and not
Totally.
not in a negative sense, but just that it's
No,
like you said, I've got to downplay everything because I can't give myself the credit I deserve, and
it's two things. It's that tall poppy syndrome, whereas Australia, you never toot your own horn, you never wave your own flag. You're perceived as arrogant if you do. So if you're working on a project or you're building something or whatever, it's always just low key, like I'm just working on a little something. So if I said to my parents, let's say I had a full-time 9 to 5, like I'm going to step out and become an entrepreneur, I'd probably be disowned. So, but I'm wondering if the culture or like family or friends are any more supportive in the States, because the impression from where I am is that if America is the capitalist center of the world, then of course everyone's supportive of like the guy to like go out and get the guy or girl to go out and get that thing and become that person and build their dreams in the land of the free and all that sort of shit. Like, is this accurate or?
I think okay, I'm going to say two things to that. I think in the kind of personal network kind of scheme of this, it's
Right.
subjective. You know what I mean? I think
Okay.
I see both levels in my own personal circle, where it's like unfettered support and just, oh my God, he's doing it. And then the vice versa, where it's like, okay, this guy's kind of a douche. Like, is he actually doing it? And I think that's people's biggest, curiosity with this. So I'll say this to that is, if you can have some sort of accreditation or proof moving through this, and this not to throw in someone's face or, I'm doing it and you're not, kind of thing. But, for instance, the podcast is its own proof. An episode comes out, people know we've done it. Here it is. I get feedback from that. And the loops are generally pretty good. So it's, I think it's present in any culture you're in, where someone's like, yeah, this guy's arrogant, he's not actually doing anything, or they don't have any scope. But at the same time too, take your wins, because I love living in that, and I think there's a lot of people that take inspiration from it, and you and I have said this a bunch. They take permission from it. They see somebody doing it and they go, oh, it is possible. Oh my God. Okay. If he can do it, I know I can do it, and I like that. I love that. I love sharing that with people and, giving them that kind of incentive to go out and find that for themselves.
You're a nice guy though, Brody.
Sometimes, I guess.
Tony, how do you feel about it? Because you, like, at the beginning of this episode, unashamedly, like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm building this, we have an agency. So how's it been for you?
yeah. So culturally, I feel like Australia and the U.S. are probably fairly similar. To be honest, with like, I think both education systems derive from the British education system, and so that tall poppy syndrome, which we don't call it that in the U.S. I can tell you that, but yeah, like that's a real thing.
Mm.
And I mean, I came to talking about creativity in public, on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
um, and elsewhere. I mean, I've had a virtual community around creative process for 6 years now, but um, I came to that through kind of this sense that we are meant to be creative beings. Right? Arguably, human history is nothing if not a story of creativity in action. And then the industrial school system trains it out of us, conditions the creativity out of us, and to optimize for people who can show up on time and take orders, right? And there are reasons that society was set up that way. And some of us fit that better than others.
Mm.
When I'm on a podcast about professional misfits, I think we can just assume that the three gentlemen on this podcast don't particularly fit that mold, right? As evidenced by the way our lives have unfolded.
Mhm.
So I still think of the conventional path to success, that American dream of, degree, which I mean, it's the dream in a
Mhm.
lot of countries around the world now, right? It's just that conventional path to success and happiness. Um, it's not real necessarily. Like that, get winning at that and winning at being a happy, healthy person are two
Yeah.
different tracks that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they don't necessarily
Not necessarily
overlap
mutually
all that
exclusive.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I've found is, um, I mean, actually, the aversion to the term entrepreneur is something that I haven't really thought about. But I pay a lot of attention to Seth Godin, who's like a marketer, author, uh, thought leader, to use your term, Chris.
Mhm.
Um, whose work I've spent a lot of time with over the last 12 years. And I remember him describing the difference between freelancing and entrepreneurship being that freelancing is basically like you've got a skill and you're selling your skill, right?
Mhm.
So it's still basically like a time for money exchange, whereas entrepreneurship is building a company, right? It's like building a thing
Yep.
where the goal is to actually render yourself obsolete, right,
Mhm.
as it grows.
Mhm.
I've never called myself an entrepreneur really until, like, I think I dabbled with the term of a social entrepreneur back in like
Hey.
2015, which I think that just meant like I'm not leading with trying to have a functional business model.
Yep.
Um, Whereas like this time around, like there was a lot of intention in as we were getting started around like what are we trying to do here, like, and
Yeah.
I say we, like I've got a business partner who's kind of supporting me in some of the stuff, but it was like, are we just trying to like do something where we're making a decent living, or
Mhm.
are we trying to build something sizable? And to Brody's point about like how hard it is, it is not for everybody.
Yeah.
I know now that I'm 6 months into building this business and it's like working.
Mm.
Um, you read this stuff, you hear people talk about this stuff, but it's like you solve one problem and your reward for solving that problem is two more problems. And
Yeah.
it's like even when things are going well, there's like this feeling of precariousness that is
Mhm.
like, it's like I'm just waiting for
Yep.
the bottom to fall out.
100%.
And I'm like, and now at this point, and Brody's been doing at this longer than I've been, so it's like I'm now understanding that's like, oh no, this is just it. Like
Yeah.
for it
Yep.
added infinitum, that never goes away.
Yep.
Yeah. And for some of us, it's great to thrive in because with that stimulus and that challenge, and it's fun and enjoyable. And for other people, my parents included, it would just be unending stress that was an irritants, and they're not cut out for, which is totally fine. And I guess the moral from all three of us, for you listening at home, is you're going to have to figure it out. This is, again, it's you can have the choice to stay or go. You can have the choice to work for the company or yourself. Again, it's one of these, it's what we're trying to break the mold of is the expectation that it is school and organization and that's your life. And to Tony's point early on, this model no longer exists. And if they're selling it, you can't trust it. So if you want some sort of autonomy, control, independence, and even to Tony's point, happiness around what you do, how you pursue it, and why, you're going to have to taste a few things at the buffet, I think.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, gents, before we sort of bring this neatly to a close? Brody?
Yeah, I just want to say, this is most of my end recaps revolve around this, but you got three very different gentlemen here with three different different life stories, and again, kind of the same, overall summary of, it is subjective, and this is about you and your journey. Like grab hold of that. Grab hold of that, and really though, taste it. Feel it, try it. Stop trying to replicate and get out there and get a sense of who you are. Because changing careers is scary, but it might just lead you into exactly who you're supposed to be. So.
Or the process is going to at least move you in that direction.
Yes.
Or like one way or another, you'll learn and you'll grow and you'll mature. Or at least that's certainly been the case for me. And that is I'm gonna keep this brief, I promise.
Go on.
When I think about like this moment we're in, and like the decisions I was making when I was 23 years old, back in like 2005 or whatever, around like what to do as a career. I do think that the world is just a different place today than it was in 2005, and maybe
of course, yeah.
maybe I was just late, but it's like things are moving so fast that I feel like my mission today, and why I call myself an evangelist for creativity, is this idea that is in my book, In the Creative Arena, about we need more creative contenders, which is this term I'm using for just people who are creatively fit, who are able to wield their creativity in a way that makes stuff happen. And I feel so strongly about that because we need that. Like where Chris, you're just saying like you want to taste different things on the buffet, like maybe you do want to stay in the organization. I'm saying like that's very much true. And I think most people are still better suited for a life that optimizes more for stability, right? And again, as Brody alluded to, it's not a good or bad thing. Like one is not better than the other, right? It's a matter of finding fit. The problem is that it seems like in the way that the world is changing, that industrial model of stable employment is going away, and it's not going to go away entirely, but it's like I want to say
it's going to be a limited resource. Yeah.
In 1968, GM employed 500,000 people, right, as like the biggest company in America. You go to like Apple, and Apple employs like 90,000. Like it's like the number is just minuscule compared. Whereas like Apple is more valuable as a company than GM was back then. Like the economics have just fundamentally shifted in a way that, you know what? Let's just run it back. Let's just do another episode. We'll roll for another 90 minutes right now. How about that?
If you've got the time. There'll definitely be room in season 2. Trust us. But it's look. I had a teacher once who suggested that apathy is a shallow grave. And to your point, Tony, like scripting is a really lovely principle. Like if you're apathetic about where you are, like you neither care or don't care, and it's okay. There's more to life than that, surely. Right? So it's either, if school ain't really your jam, we've all all three of us, I'm pretty sure, have done it. Like, pack your bags, travel to somewhere you've never been, get your heart broken, get lost, lose your shit in the rain, figure it out. I've always been a huge advocate of change begets change, regardless of where you're going. So even if you want to step out of jobs or life or relationships or whatever, then step out and try something. If that's not it, to Tony's point, you're on your path to finding the thing that will be. And I've got 20 case studies of things that didn't quite work out the way they were supposed to. But I can say this, for every role that I was in before, I most definitely had to censor a sizable portion of either my personality, intelligence, or skill set in order to fit in that box. And now I'm in a position where, I can bring all of me, everything, and all of who I am. And the results are greater than the sum of their parts. And I'm infinitely more satisfied with what I'm doing, what I'm writing, what I'm achieving, the people I meet. Tony's one of them. We bonded over a disagreement on creativity on LinkedIn, and now here we are 2 years later. Brody and I formed a podcast out of a failed first podcast, and all of this is sort of moving ahead, right? So it won't be the end of the world. It might suck and be uncomfortable, and that's a discussion for another time about managing this discomfort, but the change is possible. So on that note, gents, Tony, if people are lawyers or if they're not lawyers, if they're in Toronto or the States or wherever they are in the world, where can they find you, man? What's the best place to contact you, get in touch, have a chat? He's a nice guy. Also, pimp your book, my friend, because I have a copy and it's great.
I appreciate you. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the best social platform. In the Creative Arena is available on Amazon. Although I think in Australia it's actually a pain in the ass to get, isn't it?
It is a bit. I had to go through Kindle to get the ebook version, but I still read it.
I appreciate you. And then contenderllc.com is our website. So that should about cover it.
That should cover
finding me.
Yeah. Nice one. Brody, if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Our very own Christopher Sellers built a wonderful website, and that is promisfitspodcast.com. All of my relevant links are there, and you can find me dinking around with Chris on LinkedIn.
Yeah, all three of us are generally like in each other's comments. And likewise, you can find me at promisfits.com. If you want to reach out to me direct, you can find me at cssellers.com, or likewise find me on LinkedIn at Christopher S. Sellers. I wrote a book too, but we can talk about that later. So coming up next is episode 5, and we're having an interval. It's a bit old school. We've got nothing on the agenda. We're just going to riff on life and where it's taken us and what we're doing and what we've been up to and how we feel, which is kind of a nice palate cleanser after this chat. It neatly leads in. Brody, you got anything on your plate that we're going to be talking about, or you'll just make it up when we get there?
I think I'm going to carry Tony's quote for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm going to start jumping off cliffs and just, learning to fly on the way down.
He's a savvy guy, and he does have one of the best beards on LinkedIn.
I will second that. For the viewers that can't see, he has a fantastic beard.
Excellently manscaped. Tony, thanks for being with us. Eventually, we finally got this episode down.
We made it.
We made it.
We did, fellas. Yes.
In the meantime, I've been Chris.
I've been Brody.
And you stay. You have.
Well, what about me?
Okay, all right. We'll do it again. Okay. I've been Chris.
I've been Brody.
And I've been Tony.
Yes. And you stay classy, Misfits. We'll see you on the next one.